This video is going to teach you all about detecting a player touching a part. It's important to learn this skill because you're going to be able to utilize this code for creating things like lasers, teleporters, or door detectors. So let's get into it. Now the first thing we want to do is create a detector part that sits on top of this platform. Now of course we can create our own and run and make it not collide and all this stuff, but we're developers, so we're going to do everything programmatically. So starting out with our platform here, let's go into server script service, click the plus sign, and let's add a module script. Now in this module script, we're going to create something called a class. And we're going to name this class Detector. There will be a separate video on what classes are, what they mean, how they run. But most importantly, we're going to need this class in order to create a really good touch detection system for our parts. So just follow along in this format with me and you'll be able to create your own class. It might be intimidating at first, and I know this is more intermediate material, but it's going to be useful for you in the long run because Lua is based off of object-oriented programming. And I'll explain that in other videos, but for now, just follow along with me. We're going to say detector.__index equals detector. So this is very similar to the format of a module script. What's cool about creating our own classes, though, is that we create a function that's called .new. And when we create that, we can do some amazing things, which we'll see in this video. So just follow along. We're adding a meta table, and I'll have a video on that in the future as well. But for now, this is basically what it looks like. We've made ourselves our own detector class. Below that, we want two functions that will initiate the detector and another function that will destroy the detector. By habit, you always want these two functions as your boilerplate in code. Even though we might not necessarily use these functions, it's always good to have. Because of this, you can copy and paste this into any other module script and create any other class you want, like poop class or something like that. Now that we've created this class, let's make it do something. We want it to detect the player when it touches a detector part. So the first thing we want to do is pass a parameter to this detector. The parameter is going to be our platform here because we're going to make a detector part that's about the same size as this platform and about 16 studs high. That way we can detect any player that walks on top of this platform. I'll show you how to do that with code. So when we create a new detector class, we want to pass along a parameter called the platform. We're going to do that later in a different script. But for right now, we are trying to get this platform on over to our detector class so our detector class knows exactly what we're dealing with. Next, let's create some settings. We know we want our detector block height to be 16 studs high. So what I'll do is I'll create a settings variable using self. This is the beauty about Lua classes, is that self referring to its own self as a script, almost as its own object. So we want our detector height to be about 16 blocks high. And then let's create another section where we get the parts. We'll create another variable called platform part. And we'll say that the platform part is the platform. Now let's create a detector part. We'll create a new variable called detector part, and let's make it equal to a function. So let's create a function called create detector part. And so this is where the power of object-oriented programming shows itself. Let's create a new function down here, and we'll call it function detector : we'll call it create detector part. So that way we can match this. So now we're saying after we get the platform part, let's create a detector part. And in order to create a part out of thin air, this is how we do it. We'll say local detector part equals instance.new, and we'll create a new part out of thin air. Then we're going to name this part detector part, and then we're going to make sure that this part is anchored, and then we're going to make this part's size equal to the size of the platform part. But then we need to offset the height, so let's give it a height offset variable, and above that let's create that variable. And the height offset is going to equal a vector 3 value, which is going to be 0, self.detector height, which is 16, minus the height of the platform, which is .size.y. That's how we get the height of the platform, and another 0. And I forgot the .size over here. So what we've done so far is we've named the part detector part, we've anchored it, we've created a height offset, which is 16 minus the height of the platform part. So that way our height offset is exactly 16 studs. And then we set the detector part's size to the platform part size plus the height offset, which will make our detector detector part 16 blocks high. Next, we want a position offset, which is going to be another vector 3 value. We'll put 0, comma. We're going to take the detector part's height and divide it by 2. And we're going to add that to another vector 3 value where we get the platform part's height and divide that by 2 as well. And when we add these two together, it allows us to set the detector part's position to just right above the current platform. Next, we have to make sure that the collide is off, so that way we can walk into it and it can detect us. And we also just have to make sure that the can touch is on, so that way it will detect our touch. And then let's make the part kind of semi-transparent, so that way we know it's there and that we know we can walk through it. And then let's parent it to the workspace, because we created a part in thin air, but we still need to put it into our 3D world. And then what we're going to do is return this detector part. So after we've returned the detector part, it comes right back over here. Boom, it returns. And now our self.detector part is this returned detector part. And this is the power of creating classes. If you don't understand it just yet, just keep following along and it may click for you. Don't worry, it took me some time as well. So now we need to activate this class somehow. So let's go back to our server script service. Let's create a new script. Let's rename this script something like detector init, which is like initiate detector. And then what we need to do is we need to get our detector class. And how we do that is we run a require statement, and our detector class is script, which is this script here, .parent. So script.parent is server script service. And then in server script service is our module script named detector. And so that's what we're requiring, the detector module script right over here. That's under server script service. That's our detector class. Next, let's get the platform, because remember, when we run our detector class .new function, we need to pass along the platform parameter. If we don't do that, we'll get an error. With that said, let's go ahead and throw an error handler in here. So that way, if we do get an error, it doesn't break our entire game. So we're going to say if the platform is not here, then let's create a message. And we're going to tell ourselves in the output, no platform. And then we'll send a warn. This is how we send a message without breaking our script, and do a return. So now going back to our detector initiate script, we're going to get our platform, because we need to pass that over as a parameter. And I'll show you guys what happens if you don't pass it over as a parameter. So our platform is in game.workspace.platform. That's our platform right there. And then on our next lines, let's create a function called initiate. And in that function, we'll call the detector class. We'll say .new and parentheses. And then let's go ahead and run initiate. So in this script, we get a detector class, we get the platform, we have a function called initiate, and we call it. When we call that initiate function, we're going to run the detector class.new, and we're going to purposely not run a parameter in here. Remember, we're supposed to pass the platform in here, but we're not doing that this time. So let's see if we get an error. We're going to press play, and as you can see, we received a warning that says no platform. And if we click it, it takes us right here to our warning message. So that means we didn't pass over the platform parameter. So let's go ahead and do that now. Control save and click play. The error I got is Y is not a valid member of part.workspace.platform. So I'm going to click that error. It's going to take me to the line where there's an issue. And as you can see, the issue here is that I put self.platformpart.y, and it's saying that Y is not a valid member of this. And that's correct, because Y is only a valid member of .size. So we forgot to put .size there. So now let's save and click play and see what we get. And so as you can see, after we fix that small typo error, there is now a part just above our platform, and it's called detector part. We can run through it because the can collide is false. It's also anchored as well. And now we just need it to begin detecting our humanoid. Great. So in our detector.new function below our parts, let's go ahead and put in an initiate comment. And then below that, let's do self:\init, and we'll run the init function. That's down here. Within the init function, we'll say self.detectorPart.Touched connect. And let's go ahead and connect a function to it. And the function we'll connect is self handleTouch. And then the parameters that are passed here is the part that was touched. And so we'll pass that through this function and we'll pass it on through to handleTouch. Now this function does not exist right now. So let's go ahead and create it. In between our create detector part and our initiate function, we'll say function detector handleTouch. Close that out. Now we've got our handleTouch function. We know that the part.Touched parameter is passed. So let's go ahead and put that there. And then let's print that parameter out. And now when we click play, let's see what prints out in our output. And I got an error. Touch is not a valid member of part. So let's click that. Let's click stop. Let's see what's going on. And it looks like I did another typo. This should be .touched past tense. And so now that we've got that error fixed, if we walk into our part, let's take a look at the output. Boom, we get all of those parts touched. It's about 16 to 17 parts touched. This is not what we're looking for because we don't want our code to run 16 to 17 times repeatedly over and over again. I mean, look at how many times this goes. We don't want this to repeat over and over again like that. So in order to prevent that from happening, we need to write a lot more code, and I'm going to show you how. Going back to our handleTouch function, we're going to go ahead and change all of this. We're going to delete the print, and we're going to say local part parent equals part.Touched dot parent, and then another variable called local humanoid because it's exactly what we're looking for. We're going to say part parent find first child humanoid. And so every time that this function runs, it's passing us the part that's touched. We're checking the parent of that part, and then we're checking to see if there's a humanoid attached to that part. Let's say you have like a car in your game. You don't want the car to be detected in this. You only want players to be detected. So this is how we detect players, by detecting if they have a humanoid. So if there's a humanoid and it exists, because that's what find first child does, find first child will run and it will tell us if there's a humanoid or not. If there is no humanoid, this will return nil or false. If there is a humanoid, it will return the humanoid. So we're saying if a humanoid exists, then our character, just for the sake of code, is the part.parent. That's our character model. And now, in order to prevent the repetitiveness of the script running 16 to 17 times, because that's how many parts are in our character model, we're going to run a function called checkPlayer, and it's going to return a Boolean value to us, either true or false. Let's create a variable called isOnTable. And that will be a function that returns a Boolean value, and that function is called checkPlayer. And we're going to pass over the character to that function. So let's go ahead and create that function by typing in function detector, and the function that we called it is checkPlayer. And then we're passing over the character as a parameter. And then let's close that out. And then of course we want our error handler. So if there is no character, then let's return a message that says no character found. And then we'll send it out as a warning in our output, and then end the function by typing return. And then if there is a character, then let's just keep running this command. So let's go ahead and get the player from the character by using the players service and using a method that they have called getPlayer from character. And we pass over the character to do that. Now you can see that players is underlined because we don't have the players service up at the top here. So let's go ahead and just skip a few lines, and up at the top we'll type in local players equals game : get service players. And now that underline should go away. And so going back down here in our checkPlayer function, let's go ahead and skip a line here. And we are going to have a variable here also called isOnTable. We're going to make it equal to false. And then what we're going to need is an actual table that this function is going to be able to utilize. So let's go ahead and add that table now in our detector.new function. Skip some lines after the parts, and let's type in utilities. And then we'll call this self.players table equals a blank table. So that's how you create a blank table with curly brackets. And this is the table that we're going to be utilizing for checkPlayer. So what we're going to say is if the length of the table is greater than 0, then that's our first conditional statement. So what we're saying is if our table isn't empty, then what we want to do next is check if the player that has touched the detector part is currently on the table. So what we're going to say is we're going to do a for loop, that looks through the user IDs that are on the table, because that's what how we're gonna put them in pairs do, and that's our loop. And then we have to say, hey, look through the players table. And what we're going to say is if the player.user_ID is equal to the user ID on the table, then our isOnTable value is equal to true. And then after that, what we're going to say, our isOnTable value is still false. That means our player was not on the table and we need to add them on there. So if isOnTable is equal false, then let's add that player to the table by typing in table.insert, and then we'll specify that we want to insert into the players table, and we're going to insert the player's user ID. And then we're going to write a delayed function that runs. So we're going to say task.delay, and we're going to put another setting up at the top at our detector.new function right under detector height, and we're going to call it self.remove player duration. And we're going to put that down as like 3 seconds. And so this is how long we want to wait for a player to be removed from the table. So back down to our checkPlayer function, we're going to go to our task.delay and we're going to say, hey, for 3 seconds or however long this remove player duration is, that's what we said, it's 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds, run this function. And the function we want to run is first handling an error, because if after 3 seconds the player leaves the game, we want to know if they're still there or not. So what we're going to say is if not player, then, and of course we're going to get our message and we're going to say player not found, and then we're going to send a warning, and then we'll end that function. And then if there is a player, what we'll say is, hey, let's look for this player on the table by using the table.find function, and we're going to look in the players table for this player's user ID. If the player is on that table, then let's remove them from the table. So we're going to use a table.remove function, and we're going to remove them from the players table, and the player index is what allows us to do that. And after we remove them from the table, we want all of the parts to be checked again. That way the whole cycle can repeat every 3 seconds or however long we set this, and we can continue detecting whether our player is still standing there or not. I'll show you what happens if we don't cycle this through. So before we can play test this and show you what it's like without cycling it through, first we need to go on over to the end of our checkPlayer function. And after our isOnTable false conditional statement, at the end of that, we're going to return our isOnTable value. And that value is going to show up in our handleTouch function, because our handleTouch function called the isOnTable value from the checkPlayer function, which is returning this isOnTable. Okay, so what we're going to say in our handleTouch function now is if isOnTable equals false, what we're saying is if the player is not on the table, then let's detect that player. And what we'll say is, how about we get like the character's name, and then we'll say was detected. And that's what I'll print. So let's go ahead and click play and see what happens. So once we touch the part, it should say chrisatm was detected. When 2 seconds goes by, our name is removed from the table and nothing repeats 16 to 17 times. And if I move again, nothing happens, right? But if I completely leave and then I come back, it'll say chrisatm was detected. But if I move while I'm moving in here, nothing happens. Well, that's because we haven't looped the touch. So let's close the loop, and now we'll see that every 3 seconds, chrisatm will be detected. Let's do that in the code. So in our checkPlayer function, if we remove the player from the table, what we want to do is close the loop by making our detector part check itself for any touching parts. So we're going to have a function called checkTouchingParts, and above our checkPlayer function, we'll make some space and create our checkTouchingParts function. And the getTouchingParts method from our parts really easy. So what we'll do is we'll create a variable called touchingParts, and we'll make it equal to the detector part, and then colon getTouchingParts. And what this method will return is all of the parts that are touching the detector part. And what we want to do is say if there are touching parts, then. So what this does is it takes the length of the touching parts table, because this actually returns a table. It checks the length of the table, and it says if there's more than 0, values in that table, then we'll go ahead and loop through that table with a for loop. And we want to go through the touching parts table, and for every part that is touched, we're going to run run the handleTouch command and pass through that part.Touched. And so the handleTouch function is down here, which pretty much runs it again as if the part was touched. So let's go ahead and save and press play. And if I go and touch this part and I stand in it every 3 seconds, chrisatm should be detected, and we got an error. The error is attempt to call missing method check touching parts. Check touching parts. Yeah, because I spelled this check touching parts and then I named this function check touch parts. So we need to just copy and paste this over here, and now the names match. We save and click play. And now if we run over this part, it'll say chrisatm detected, and in just a few seconds it'll say chrisatm was detected again, and in just a few seconds it'll do it again. So ×3, ×4, and if we run away and come back, it should be doing this over and over and over again. And so this is how like you would make a laser that damages you every 3 seconds, blah, blah. But let's go ahead and like stop this script and let's go ahead and change some settings, right? Let's go ahead and make the detector height like double what it was. And let's make the remove player duration like 1 second. So every 1 second, it will detect me when I'm standing inside of that part. And now you can see the part is extra tall. And then when we stand in there, every 1 second we are being detected. And so that is the beauty of classes in Roblox. It's just 2 scripts. We have a little 9-line script here to activate our detector class, and then our detector class is about 100 lines, which is not bad, and we always skip a lot of lines here, but this is the basics of a detection block, and I would say this script is extremely robust and will work for your purposes. And I'll be creating more videos where we can explain some of the use cases of these touch detectors. After editing, I decided I wanted to change some things around, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this if not player then conditional statement. We're going to cut it out with Control X. We're going to paste it below our player variable here. And so now we're looking for the character. If the character is not found, return an error. We're looking for the player. If the player is not found, return an error. And then what I would like to do after that is get the player's user ID. So I'm going to create a variable called player user ID, which is going to equal the player.user ID. And so basically if our player does exist, let's get the player's user ID, and then we'll use this as the variable on everything. So we'll replace the player user ID there with this new variable that we have, and then that will be that. And then I'm much more satisfied with that code. Now, before I leave, I just want to cover kind of an advanced concept. Now, let's say, for instance, we have more than one platform here. Let's go ahead and like duplicate this, and let's go ahead and like make this a blue platform or something like that. And then let's go to Workspace and create a folder. So in that folder, we'll go ahead and call them platforms. We're going to take our platforms and then store them inside of that folder. And so now we have a folder called platforms with 2 platforms inside of them. But if I go ahead and click play right now, I'm just going to get an error. I moved all my platforms into a folder, and now my script does not work. So here's what you do if you have more than one platform where you want more detection systems, or you're running the same code over and over again. What you'll want to do, head on over to this script and alter it in some way, and you'll say local platforms instead. You'll say game.workspace.platforms. This is calling over the folder, and in order to initiate all of this, what we'll want to say is a for loop, and for every platform in pairs do. And we're going to loop through this platforms folder. We're going to get the children, looping through them, and then we're going to create the new detector class. So we'll delete that line there. We'll create the new detector class and pass over the platform parameter. So what's happening here is we're getting the detector class, we're getting the platforms folder, we're looping through the platforms folder, getting each platform and creating a new detector class. So if we save this and click play, the error we get is children is not a valid member of folder platforms. Okay. So the reason why that errored is because this is supposed to be get children and not just children. So save and play. And now we have 2 platforms that have the same exact functionality. So if I run over here, it'll say chrisatm was detected. If I run over here, chrisatm was detected. And I could just keep running over both, and they both do the same exact things. Like every 3 seconds, this will detect. So now let me give you a final overview of the entirety of the script. So in server script service, we have 2 scripts, one called detector init and another one called detector. The detector init is a regular script. The detector is a module script. Going over the detector init script, we first call the module script. We name it detector class by getting the scripts.parent server script service, and then calling detector. Next, we get the platforms, which are located in a folder, and then we loop through that platforms folder, get each child in that folder, which is each platform, and we call the detector class, passing over the platform as a parameter. Moving on over to our detector module script, this is considered a class, and we need the player's service, so that way we can get the humanoid of the player. This is the basic structure of a Lua class. First, we start with a .new function, which has an error handler that says, hey, you need to pass the platform as a parameter. If you don't, then let's pass a warning that says, hey, there's no platform. Let's create a couple of settings variables. We want the detector height to be 16 studs tall, and we want the player to be removed from a player's table every 3 seconds. Let's create a variable called platform part, and we'll set that as the platform parameter that was passed. After that, let's create a detector part using a function called createDetectorPart, where we create a new part, we name it detector part, we anchor it, we set the size, we set the position, we say it cannot collide, we say the can touch is true, we make it semi-transparent, and then we parent it to the workspace, and then we return detector part. So we set the self.detectorPart variable basically to this new detector part. And then we run a function called init, which initiates our whole class. So here's our detector initiate function, which says, hey, get our detector part, and when it's touched, run the handleTouch function. When the handleTouch function runs, get the parent of the part that's touched as a parameter, and check if there's a humanoid attached to it. If there is a humanoid, then let's check if that player is on a table by running the checkPlayer function. So when the checkPlayer function runs, we have a character passed as a parameter. If the character is not passed as a parameter, then send a warning message that no character was found. If a character was found, then let's check if the player is there by using the player service, the getPlayerFromCharacter method. And then if the player is not found, then we'll send a warning message that the player is not found. But if the player is found, then let's get the player's user ID, and we're going to create a variable that says is on table and set it to false. And what we're going to say is if the player's table has data in it, then let's loop through that data and say if our player's user ID matches any of the user IDs found on the player table, then we're going to set the is on table value to true. And then what's going to happen is if our is on table value is set to true, then we're just going to return. But if our is on table value has remained as false, then we're going to insert that player's user ID into the player's table. And then after a certain delay, which we specified was 3 seconds, we're going to run a function that looks for the player user ID in the table and then remove them from the table if the user ID is in there. After we remove the player from the table, then we'll run the checkTouchingParts function. When the checkTouchingParts function runs, our detector part runs a method called getTouchingParts. It returns a table to us, and if that table isn't empty, then let's loop through all those touching parts, get the part touched as a parameter, and pass it to our handleTouch function, which starts the whole loop all over again. And that's the overview of our script. This is just the basics of detecting a humanoid when they touch the part and making it so that it doesn't repeat over and over again. And as always, the link to be able to access the code is found in the description. All you do is click that. It takes you to this page, and right next to where it says block example here, you click those little 3 dots, and then you click edit, and it'll open up Roblox Studio for you. And when Roblox Studio opens, you'll find the code inside of the server script service. There will be 2 scripts that you can open up, find the code. You can even play the game yourself and see if it works. See you all next time.